Oh, this is gonna be crazy. Whoa, whoa, that was great. Alright, hello everyone, and welcome today to another episode of SpraynPray1000's Verdict. I am SpraynPray1000, and today I'm going to review a game that I actually started back when it came out, and it basically fell onto hiatus during the couple busy weeks of 2014 when I was busy with school, and then Assassin's Creed Rogue took place, and that kind of took me out the month of November. So it's been almost 2 months since this game came out, and I'm finally getting around to reviewing it. It is a new release. The game is called The Evil Within. It is a survival horror game made by the same person who made, or who was the director of the original Resident Evil and Resident Evil 4, Shinji Mikami. Pretty well known when it comes to the survival horror video game genre because of his work on Resident Evil. And today we're exploring his newest project, published by Bethesda Studios, Bethesda Softworks, I believe. You know, it's a pretty interesting game, so I think we're going to jump right into it. You know, there's some good and some bad here. So first things first, it's a survival horror game. It's a third-person game as well, so it's a third-person shooter, very similar to, say, Resident Evil 4. Although one of the big differences right away, getting right into gameplay, I guess, is that you can move and shoot. Sebastian can sprint, he can sneak. So at some points in the game, you'll be able to do some stealth-like gameplay. At other points, you'll be restricted, or you know, it might be more advantageous to like kind of run around and kite enemies, you know, outmaneuver them, and do your best to really stay away from them as much as you can. And this especially goes true for some bosses. At some points, some bosses you'll need to sneak by, or otherwise you'll die instantly. Some bosses you'll need to, you know, run around, or maybe they'll kill you instantly if they get a good move on you. And I guess one of the things you can immediately grasp from this is instant death. Instant death is also a big factor in a lot of these, in a lot of Mikami's games. You know, be it Resident Evil or this one, instant death is something that they put in a lot of these games. So be wary of that. That sometimes, no matter what your health is, you will just simply die because an enemy did a certain attack. And can it be annoying? Yeah, it's a little bit more of a trial and error thing if you don't know what's coming. But it's not too bad, I don't think. The Evil Within features a couple of different weapons. You know, you have your standard pistol, shotgun, sniper, and late in the game you also get a magnum. But you know, those are your standard type of guns you see in a lot of different games. You know, especially, you know, again, you're going to hear me compare this to Resident Evil quite a lot this review. Similar to Resident Evil, you know, those guns are virtually unchanged, although the upgrade trees are a bit different. But one of the most unique weapons in the game has to be the Agony Crossbow. The Agony Crossbow is a crossbow that shoots various different arrows with warheads on them. So basically, one of the crossbow bolts might be explosive, and it might stick to walls, or it might stick to enemies, and you know, it'll detonate whenever an enemy comes closer. If it's stuck on an enemy, it'll detonate after a couple of seconds. There is a freeze bolt, which allows you to freeze enemies in place, and if they're weaker enemies, they'll instantly die when they come out of being frozen. There's a shock bolt, which kind of does the same thing, except it electrifies enemies. You could probably shoot it on water and also electrify some people. Yeah, there's a couple of different ones. There's a light one that lets you stealth kill enemies. It basically works like a flashbang. And, you know, there's a couple ones that, you know, are pretty staple, you know, pretty important, like the harpoon, which deals massive damage and can stick enemies to walls. So the Agony Crossbow is definitely a very useful tool in your inventory, especially since it doesn't consume traditional ammo. You either loot bolts from the environment, or you can create them yourself with parts that you get from disarming bombs, bear traps, tripwires, and, you know, the like. And I like that. I think it creates an interesting dynamic because it kind of lets you adapt your inventory to the way that you play. So if you prefer to just harpoon everything, you're very much able to. If you want to use time bombs and light bolts, then you're also welcome to. Of course, it is worth mentioning that these parts, as the game goes further and further, it gets harder and harder to defuse these traps that I'm talking about. And some traps actually do not give you any parts for defusing them, which is a little bit annoying, especially later in the game. But nonetheless, I think that there's at least a sufficient amount to be able to use the crossbow fairly regularly, which is fine. Let's get on to the one big thing I want to talk about with this game is the ammo. The ammo in this game is pretty reasonably laid out. I don't know if you've heard what I said about Resident Evil 6, but there was a part of there wasn't a part. Like most of Resident Evil 6, even if you took the bonus ammo perks you would get at the end of every chapter, it was almost like the game just did not give you ammo for jack shit. And I think that was one of the major problems with Resident Evil. Like, it's, survival horror is fine. Survival horror is, nothing, there's nothing wrong with survival horror. And the fact that they make you have ammo conservation and try to save as many bullets as possible. But in order for me to save as many bullets as possible, you have to give me some bullets to begin with. And that's one of the biggest pitfalls of Resident Evil 6, is the fact that they do not really give you the ammo that you need in order to beat the game. And just the fact that the inventory system has been so streamlined in that game that, ammo just kind of comes and goes. And I even at one point suggested that they scale the difficulty of the game based on how much ammo you have. Evil Dead, oh my god. The Evil Within doesn't fall victim to any of that. There was one part of the game where I was kind of complaining about no ammo, because they basically spawn boxes. And for 2 or 3 chapters, every box I broke, and I broke basically every box I want to say in the level, in all those 3 levels, did not drop any kind of ammo at all, which is kind of, I don't know if I really just drew the unlucky shaft on every single roulette, to spawn what kind of ammo or to spawn nothing, and I just got nothing every single time for 3 chapters. But that seems a little bit unlikely. I'm not really sure what to say about those 2 chapters, other than, it's very weird, and I was beginning to feel very stressed and starved for ammo. But that makes it all the more important that, you carefully place your shots and such, that this game will not always give you a dependable amount of ammo. I think that they could have upped it definitely in those chapters a little bit more, given the amount of enemies that you face. So this game is actually quite unlike other, survival horror games, because it's pretty combat oriented. There's a lot of combat to be had in this game, and the combat isn't, amazing. It's not fantastic. I would say that Resident Evil 6 is probably one of the pinnacles of combat for survival horror, at least in some aspects, namely the fact that you can dodge roll, you can flop on the ground, you can do almost Matrix-like moves to kind of avoid your enemies and, get around them. Sebastian has some of that, but not all of it. And, those of you who are more familiar with Resident Evil might remember that up to, like, Resident Evil 6, they had tank-based controls for Resident Evil. Well, that's basically gone. That doesn't exist in the Evil Within, which is pretty good. But unfortunately, Evil Within, Sebastian Castellanos, who is the protagonist of this game, does not really have any dodge rolls or anything to speak of. All he has is his ability to sprint. And what's really cool that they do is if you take too much damage, you cannot sprint. Which can create problems for you if you're not careful. So I might as well get into some of the story, and then I'll talk about what I really didn't like about this game. The story of The Evil Within follows a veteran police detective, Sebastian Castellanos, as he, with his 2 other partners, responds to a 911 call from Beacon Mental Hospital in the city of Crimson City, I know, of which he is a detective. And upon arriving, he gets thrust into this nightmarish world where these weird, like, undead-like creatures roam the land, and his friends are nowhere to be found, and he's constantly plagued by headaches, and a lot of weird stuff is going on, and basically he's trying to figure out a way to get out of here. Now, right off the bat, I will tell you that Sebastian is a very likable protagonist. I believe that he definitely is well characterized through personal documents. You really get a feel for his character through his backstory, which is explained slowly as the game progresses. until ultimately you catch right up to where you are and where the beginning of the game was. But the one thing I will say is that you can definitely tell this is made by the same guy as Resident Evil, when the dialogue for Sebastian is just as awkward as some of the older Resident Evils. So there will be crazy nightmarish shit going all around Sebastian, and he will act like he is completely oblivious to it. He'll say some of the cheesiest lines you can think of, and I don't know if that's just Mikami's style, or I don't know if that's just how his team develops these kind of characters. They think that that's good, but it really comes off, especially in a game like this where it's not a cartoony, well, I wouldn't say cartoony, but it's not like a slapstick style 1990s game. This is a pretty serious game. There's a lot of very disgusting, vile things going on in this game. This game has some of the nastiest scenes I've seen in a video game in quite some time. And when you have a character like Sebastian kind of break the flow like that a little bit, that's not to say every single one of his dialogue pieces is horrible, but there are some moments in the game where I just feel like his dialogue is just like very off touch with what's actually happening around him. And it kind of, destroys the character that you begin to build up in your head of, this detective who is plagued by misfortune, and, he finds his only escape in a bottle of, in drinking. And I will say, though, that Sebastian is a very interesting character. I do like him a lot. I hope that, you guys will like him too, because he's not too bad, but you can definitely see the markings on him with some of the original Resident Evil is infamous for a lot of its cheesy dialogue, I should say. So you can definitely tell this is the same guy. Now I will get on to the biggest complaint of the game, and that is without a doubt the camera. The camera of this game is just so like I don't want to say outdated, but it just feels like such a weird design choice. So you're playing, a survival horror game where you got to be keen to everything in the environment. The game is in letterbox. It's in widescreen. Even if you're playing on like a widescreen TV or something like that, the game is naturally in widescreen. So you'll end up with losing, like, I want to say like 30% of the screen because you have black bars on, the top and the bottom. And I get what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to simulate like you're watching a movie. Like this is a movie that you're watching play out in front of you. That this is, it's kind of supposed to give the most cinematic experience possible. But unfortunately, they gave the most cinematic experience possible at the cost of, being able to see things on the up or the down, namely the down of the screen. And to me, it's a weird design choice, especially in a survival horror game, that they would do this. And a lot of times the camera, it feels like you're looking at too little of a picture to be able to function efficiently. So for example, I'll give a perfect example. One time during my playthrough, I was fighting a boss, and basically the boss is unkillable. Your only option is to escape. And if it catches you, it deals an instant death maneuver. You have to restart. So basically, I'm fighting this boss, and in order to beat the boss, you have to turn on several fire hoses or fire nozzles scattered around the area to basically burn it. And unfortunately, the problem with that is you need to understand where the boss is in relation to you, and also where, when to shoot it. There's a couple of different things you got to know, because if you screw up, you're dead. So one of the things that I found out is that while trying to aim up, you have to look up to shoot at it to make it shoot the fire onto the boss, is that you can't see the boss while you're trying to do that. And, it's a couple of situations like this, that really come into play. And also, given the fact that the game has, like, idle sway on the pistol, and basically the further and further you are away from an enemy, even though there's idle sway, there's also variable randomness to the bullets, which is a pretty cool mechanic. I do like it. In a survival horror game, it gets really annoying when a lot of times you have your bullets, and they're pretty scarce, and, maybe the crosshair is a little bit on your opponent, and it just kind of goes off because, you hit that one spot, you unfortunately unlucked out, and your bullet missed. That can be a little bit annoying. And just, I feel like the camera is very weird. It feels at some points way too close to Sebastian, and it just doesn't let you see a lot of what you need. So you might be sneaking, and you might not be able to see like a bear trap on the ground. So the camera is definitely the biggest enemy in the game. And for good reasons, yeah, maybe, but at the same time for bad reasons. And I didn't like the camera. The camera was my nemesis from part 1. But what I will say is that at least I got used to it. Now, I don't know if everyone will get used to it, but I believe that, once you play the game for a couple of hours, you'll get used to the fact that the camera is kind of like that. And maybe you'll adapt to it. The other problem with the camera being so weird, and also this might be a problem just in general, is that when you're trying to pick up ammo, you can only pick up ammo when Sebastian and when you can see the X or the A to pick up said ammo. You can only do that when you see the icon to do it. And the icon will only appear if the camera is rotated a certain way. So let's say you're trying to run from a monster, you know that there's ammo towards the screen that you want to grab. You might not grab it while mashing X to try and grab it, and the monster behind you is going to come after you because the camera isn't rotated to it. So that's a little bit annoying, I feel. So far we have a protagonist that's so-so, but somewhat charming in a lot of different ways. What I will say, though, is that the story is interesting. The story definitely had me guessing until the end, and I did like that, It's very rare that you can actually find a story that has a little bit of in-depth to it. And is it a little bit far-fetched? Yeah, but there's always that note, there's always going to be that in a survival horror game, I feel. They're not always going to have the most logical stories. And you kind of have to, take it with a grain of salt, and suspend your disbelief. So it's actually pretty interesting. I do like it. The story definitely is about 15 chapters, I believe. It's about, I want to say that the story is a good length, a little bit longer than what it should have, but I think the reason for that is because a lot of the chapters in this game are either very long or very short. So like four or so of the chapters are incredibly short. They might literally consist of 4 or 5 different enemy encounters, and then that's the end of the chapter. I think what was it, like chapter 6 was super long, and chapter 8 and chapter 4 were very short. So it's a little bit weird, like the balancing of the chapters is a little bit weird. But the game is still pretty reasonably long. I would say that I don't remember how long Resident Evil 4 took me, but it's about getting up there, at least for me. So I do like that. Another thing I will say is that I do like the fact that there is a New Game Plus, very true to a lot of his older works. There is a New Game Plus mode if you want to replay the game. I can attest to that. Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5, I replayed them, so many times with their New Game Plus. It really added a whole new depth to the game to, replay with your custom weapons, to level your stuff up again and again. So I do like that. I will give them a thumbs up for that. They do have an upgrade ability in this game. You sit down in a chair and you spend what's called green gel to upgrade Sebastian's abilities, his health, his melee, his sprint time, any weapons of his you upgrade with green gel. So you might upgrade your fire rate, your capacity, your recoil, your recoil. You might be able to add critical hits. You can upgrade the damage on a weapon, reload speed, and you can also upgrade the Agony Crossbow and each one of its bolts individually. One thing I will say about the Agony Crossbow is I do feel like some of the bolts are just kind of unnecessary or too expensive to really be used, in my opinion. That's a minor thing. I just feel like they kind of focused a little bit too much on the Agony Crossbow, giving it so many bolts. And some of them I quite literally just never really seriously even considered. So yeah. But I do like that, I do like the upgrade tree. The problem is as things go on and on, obviously it gets more expensive, so you have to, conserve more and more upgrade points to even consider upgrading certain stats. What I will say is that in those same chapters that I was not getting any ammo, I was getting a lot of experience points, which does help you out. But like I said, Resident Evil 6 had this problem. A lot of experience points means that unfortunately you really do not, it doesn't help you immediately. It doesn't help you until the next upgrading tree, which can be very annoying, I feel. Now, this game has pretty decent checkpointing, I will say. You can save your game from the save room, which is really helpful, and, the game will not auto-save too much. So, I will say that this game is pretty good. I do like it. I do think that he put a lot of good work into it. And now I will jump into the presentation really quickly. The soundtrack of this game is really good. I like it a lot. The soundtrack and presentation, the graphics and the lighting on the PlayStation 4 version, I should mention, is what I'm reviewing. On the PS4 version of The Evil Within, the lighting looks great. There are a few moments where you have like little weird technical problems with it, like you have a shadow that seems to extend infinitely or something along those lines. But for the most part, the game is really good in that aspect. I do like it a lot. The presentation and the feel of this game are really, really good. Now I'm going to append that statement with, unfortunately, something bad. The problem I feel with this game that, like, I want to say Resident Evil 4 had. Resident Evil 5 not so much, because it was a different feeling for that game, I feel. And the problem I have with this game is just quite simply that around halfway through the game, or no, I want to say the first like 10 or so chapters are really, really driven, intriguing, good, and scary. I like them. And, you'll see a lot of homages to, like, his, Mikami's works on Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 5 at some points. Where you start off in a village, and then there's a graveyard segment, and then there's a catacomb segment, and then there's, a haunted mansion level. And really just, if you know this man and you know his work and you're familiar with it, it really just speaks to him. It speaks to this is kind of like his dream masterpiece, and I like that. But the problem with a lot of these games, and I find that with all the Resident Evils and a lot of horror games in general, is that they only have that scary aspect at the start. And I don't know what it is about them, but they really kind of only keep that horrific atmosphere for the beginning of the game. And then after that, they lose it, and I'm not really sure why. So for the first 10 or so chapters of this game, the first 2/3 of the game essentially, the game is incredibly good. I really feel that the atmosphere is really, really well done. But the problem is just that after that, you move into this, like, this city area, and then it kind of loses that aspect. Well, not too much is what I'll say, because there are still stealth segments. The game doesn't lose what it already has. It just feels a little bit more combat-oriented and different. Like, the horror kind of leaves the game around the last couple of acts. And I noticed this with Resident Evil 4. I noticed this with Resident Evil 5, I want to say, a couple other horror games, a couple other Resident Evil games, is that the atmosphere of horror dissipates, halfway to 2/3 of the way through the game. In Resident Evil 4, I was, petrified of the village. I was mildly terrified of the castle segment. But after the castle segment, on the island segment, I wasn't really that scary because it kind of changed the game from into Call of Duty. You're fighting infected Plaga with guns, and the same thing happens here. After a certain point, the enemies start using guns, and I mean, they're crack shots, I'll tell you that. They're really good, but it becomes gunfighting. I mean, it does kind of break it up a bit, but you can tell that the feel of the game really shifts gears. And I mean, it's not a horrible thing that they did this. I won't say it's not like it's catastrophic and it destroys the game, but unfortunately, it kind of ruins the horror aspect, which thankfully does come back at the final chapter and the chapter before it a bit. So that's not too bad. But there is a segment of the game where they kind of just like lose it, and the element of mystery and such is kind of lost. So what I will say is that the presentation, though, I will still say gets like an A- from me, because it is really good. It is something you would want to replay again and again. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of different enemies, a lot of different segments of the game. For the 15 chapters that there are, they really didn't have to reuse stuff too much, which is pretty cool. It's not like you're fighting, the same generic mini-boss room after room. At some points, mini-bosses don't even reappear for, 6 to so chapters, which is pretty cool and pretty helpful. And I like that. The only problem I will say is, again, the camera. The camera really kind of sucks, I feel. I wish it could have been a little bit better, a little bit more stable, a little bit less, weird. And definitely, the option to toggle letterbox. would have been helpful. Like, the cinematic feel is cool for a little bit, but when it gets right down to it during gameplay, it's not really that helpful. But I mean, you know, I do like Evil Within, because I did like the fact that it is kind of like Resident Evil in that regard. You know, it is a lot of fun. It is just, you know, downright, you know, replayable at the end of the day. You know, especially whether you want to collect all the keys to unlock all the safes in the save room, or if you just want to, you know, level up and, you know, get Sebastian to maximum level, or if you just want to enjoy a good horror game. You know, that's always a possibility. That's always an option. And that's why I will say that the Evil Within, despite, you know, a lot of its flaws, is still one of my favorite games this year. It is a really well done game, and even though it's not perfect, and I'm not going to give it a super high score, you know, that you might expect I would give it, I will say that the Evil Within, without a doubt, pushes some envelopes, is mostly safe in various regards. And I think that I will give The Evil Within an 84 out of 100. It's not amazing, but it's really, really well done in the areas that he excels in, and in the areas that the team really had, I want to say, a focus and a vision for. It's really, really good in that regard. And at least throughout the game, what I will say is that they did put a lot of effort into the game. And definitely just the feel of it feels really nice. So an 84 is what I'll give The Evil Within. Really, really fun, and I like it. And I hope that, you know, Shinji Mikami, you know, this isn't like his masterpiece and he retires after this. I really hope he goes back and maybe makes a sequel to this game, makes a spiritual successor, makes something to do with it. So, really, really good game when you get right down to it. Not fantastic, not super amazing. So yeah, I turboed through this game. It's pretty good. You know, when I say turbo, of course, I mean I kind of dedicated all my effort and time on my channel to playing this game. So now I guess the next game that I'm going to probably review is going to be Kingdom Hearts 2.5 and Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep in the 2.5 HD remaster. Now, I actually don't know. Did I do them as separate reviews last year for 1.5 and Chain of Memories? I might have. I want to say I did. I will see, however, if I did, if I didn't, and it was one review. I think it was one. I get the feeling like it was one review, but I will see. If it is one review, I will do it as one review. If it is two reviews, I will do it as two reviews. It doesn't really matter, you know. But definitely, you know, really, really lots of fun. So thank you. I will see you next time for Kingdom Hearts 2.5, and then after that, Assassin's Creed Unity, I believe, was my schedule. Something like that. So, alright, take it easy.